Hi, this is Crisp Storytime, and today's story is my boyfriend refused to let me be maid of honor at my best friend's wedding because my high school ex was the best man. He gave me an ultimatum saying, choose between me and that wedding. He had no idea what was coming. I have known my best friend longer than I have known how to drive, cook, or make a single good decision about men. We were 9 years old when we first met. It was the first day of 4th grade when she sat down next to me at lunch because every other seat in the cafeteria was taken, and she did not want to eat alone. By Friday, we were walking home together. By the end of that year, she was the first person I called when anything happened, good or bad, and she felt the same way about me. We grew up 3 streets apart in the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and nobody locked their doors during the day. Chloe's mom made the best lemon cake I have ever tasted, and she always had a slice ready when I came over after school. My mom drove us to dance recitals and swim meets and every school event that required a parent who had gas in the car. We were woven into each other's families in the easy, uncomplicated way that only happens when you start young enough. When Chloe met Marcus in sophomore year of high school, I watched it happen in real time. He was quiet and steady and a little bit shy, and he looked at her like she was something he could not quite believe was real. Chloe pretended not to notice for about 3 weeks before she admitted to me that she had been thinking about him constantly. They were together by the end of October, and I cannot think of a single moment after that where being together seemed difficult for them. They were just easy, the way the right people are. By the time Marcus proposed, for years into their relationship, Chloe called me before she called her own mother. She was crying and laughing at the same time, her voice coming through the phone in broken fragments that I had to piece together like a puzzle. When I finally understood what she was trying to tell me, I started crying too. We stayed on the phone for almost an hour saying very little, just existing together in the feeling of it. She asked me to be her maid of honor the following week over coffee. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She laughed and pointed out she had not even gotten to the question yet. I told her it did not matter. The answer was always going to be yes. The months that followed were some of the best I had experienced in a long time. Chloe and I fell into a rhythm of weekend planning sessions. Venue visits, color swatches, long afternoons over coffee pulling apart wedding magazines and rebuilding something that actually looked like her. I loved every minute of it. It was the particular joy of watching someone you have known since childhood step into the life they were always meant to have. It was during one of those sessions, about 2 months in, that Chloe mentioned the best man. She brought it up casually, the way you mention something you assume is not complicated. Marcus had chosen his closest friend from high school, a guy named Ryan. She added it with a small smile, watching my face for the reaction she expected. I went still for just a moment. Ryan. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. To understand why that name landing the way it did matters, you have to understand what Ryan was to me, and more importantly, what he was not. We had dated for 3 years during high school. We met in junior year when we were assigned to the same group project in history class. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person whose jokes landed precisely because he did not announce them. We started talking outside of class. We started texting. By November, we were something neither of us had quite named yet, and by December, we were together officially. I liked him a great deal. That is the honest truth of it. We talked about the future the way teenagers do, with complete sincerity and almost no idea of what the future actually involves. We talked about going to university together, about what our lives might look like at 25, at 30. It all seemed very real and very possible from where we were standing. Then the acceptance letters came. Ryan got into a program 3 states away that was exactly what he had been working toward. I got into one an hour from home that was exactly right for me. We tried for a few weeks to find a version of things that could survive the distance, but we were honest with each other, and we both knew the answer. We were 18, and we were about to become completely different people in completely different places. Holding on would have cost us the easy warmth of what we had and replaced it with something strained and resentful. We said goodbye in the parking lot outside his house on a Sunday afternoon in August. I cried on the drive home. I cried for about 2 weeks after that. The way you cry when something ends that you genuinely loved. Then university began, and it absorbed me completely the way new chapters do when they are the right ones. Ryan and I did not stay in contact. Not out of bitterness. There was none. We simply became people who had mattered to each other once, and then moved forward into separate lives. The only remaining thread, one I had never thought much about until now, was Marcus. Ryan and Marcus had stayed close over the years. Of course Marcus would choose him as his best man. It made complete sense. What I felt sitting across from Chloe in that coffee shop was not dread or excitement or anything complicated. It was mild surprise, quickly followed by the clear and settled sense that this was not a problem. Ryan and I had not spoken in 3 years. The wedding was about Chloe and Marcus. I was there to be a maid of honor, not to revisit something that had ended cleanly half a decade ago. I told Chloe as much. She nodded and reached for her coffee, and we moved on to discussing centerpieces. What neither of us knew was that the problem was not Ryan at all. The problem was the person I was going to tell about him that evening. Noah and I met at university orientation the previous year. He was standing in the wrong line for course registration, and I pointed it out to him. He looked so genuinely relieved that I ended up waiting while he sorted it out. We talked for an hour. We exchanged numbers. 3 weeks later, we had our first date. Being with him had always felt natural, warm, easy, comfortable in the way that good things are. He met Chloe, and she liked him immediately. Everything seemed simple. I told him about Ryan on a Tuesday evening. We were cooking dinner together, and I mentioned it casually, between chopping vegetables and checking the stove. I kept my voice light because there was nothing heavy about it as far as I was concerned. Ryan was the best man. We had dated years ago. We had not spoken since. Noah went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means someone is thinking. The kind that means they are feeling something large and are trying to decide what to do with it. I put the knife down. I turned to face him. He admitted he was not comfortable with it. I asked him to explain what he meant. He pointed out that Chloe's wedding format required each bridesmaid to be paired with a groomsman for the processional and the choreographed first dance and the official photographs. He added that he did not like the idea of me spending the most photographed day we had shared together visibly paired with someone I used to have feelings for. He mentioned weddings were romantic settings and that he could not shake the image of them. I explained, carefully and without irritation, that what he was describing was logistics. Walking in a processional was not a romantic act. Participating in a group dance that had been choreographed weeks in advance was not a romantic act. I told him that Ryan and I had not been in contact for 3 years and that neither of us had any interest in the other. I told him he was also invited to the wedding and that I would spend most of the evening with him. He acknowledged everything I was saying. Then he added that he did not want me to go. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter and more serious than anger. I looked at him across the kitchen and I thought about the question underneath his words. Whether what I did with my time and my commitments and my friendships was subject to his approval. I did not say any of this out loud. I told him I needed to think and we ate dinner in the particular kind of silence that means something has been said that cannot be unsaid. I gave it 2 days before I brought it up again. When I did, I was direct. I told Noah I had heard his concerns and took them seriously. I also told him that I was going to be Chloe's maid of honor. That was not a negotiation. That was simply the truth. He was not happy. He insisted I was dismissing his feelings. I clarified that I was not dismissing them. I was explaining that his feelings did not override a commitment I had made to my closest friend. The argument escalated slowly, and then quickly. He brought up the photographs, that they would hang in Chloe and Marcus's home for years, and every time we visited, he would be looking at images of me with Ryan. I explained that those would be photographs of a wedding party doing their jobs, not romantic portraits. He pushed back that I was being dismissive. I maintained that I was being accurate. At one point, he suggested Chloe had always had a subtle problem with him, that this whole situation was somehow designed to push me back toward Ryan. I countered that this was not how Chloe operated and not how friendships of 15 years functioned. He added that he was just being honest about how it felt. I pointed out that feelings and facts were different things. He eventually agreed to come to the wedding, not graciously. He explained it was because he did not want to be left out and did not like the thought of me having a significant experience without him. I told him I was glad. What I did not say was that his reason, not wanting to be left out, was not the one I had hoped for. We went to bed that night with the argument technically over and something between us that had not been there before. The 2 weeks after that conversation were deceptive. Noah returned to being warm and attentive, and I began to believe we had genuinely worked through something difficult and come out the other side. Then the softness started to feel different. He began making comments about what a good boyfriend he was, small jokes at first, woven into ordinary moments, reminding me how patient he had been, how understanding, how much he was doing for me. I laughed the first time. The second time I smiled. By the 5th time I noticed I was not smiling anymore. Then came the questions. He had always asked where I was going and who I was with, and I had always answered without thinking because I had nothing to hide and assumed the questions came from ordinary interest. But they started coming more frequently, and I started hearing them differently. After each answer came another question. He began reading messages over my shoulder when I was on my phone. I had always given him my password and thought nothing of it. But there was a difference between having access and actively monitoring, and I was starting to feel the difference. One afternoon I was heading to meet a friend from my course for coffee, a simple outing I had been looking forward to all week. Noah asked where I was going. I told him. He followed with which coffee shop. I answered. He continued with who else would be there. I explained it was just the 2 of us. Then came what time I would be back. I gave him a rough estimate. Finally, he asked me to send him a photo when I arrived. I stood in the doorway of my apartment with my coat half on and looked at him. He explained he just wanted to know I got there safely. I pointed out the coffee shop was a 12-minute walk from my front door. He shrugged, adding it would make him feel better. I sent the photo. When I got home, he asked who had been sitting near us. I told him I had not paid attention. He grew quiet in the way I was beginning to recognize as a precursor to something longer. He insisted he was just curious. I replied it felt like more than curiosity. He dismissed it as me being sensitive. That was the first time he used that word about me. It would not be the last. The worst argument happened on a Thursday evening, 10 days before the wedding. It started because I had spent the afternoon with Chloe doing a final dress fitting and then stayed for dinner at her apartment. I had told Noah where I was going. I had texted when I arrived. I had texted when I left. When I got home at 9 o'clock, Noah was sitting on the sofa with an expression I could not immediately read. He asked if Ryan had been there. I looked at him and answered no. He brushed it off as just asking. I pointed out Ryan would not have been at Chloe's apartment for a dress fitting. He responded that he did not know that. I countered that he should have trusted it. He replied that trust had to be earned. I reminded him we had been together for 2 years. The argument that followed was different from the earlier ones. There was something raw about it. He insisted he had been trying to be supportive, but that I kept making it harder. I asked how. He argued that I was dismissive of his feelings and always made his concerns seem unreasonable. I responded that his concerns had been unreasonable and that I had been honest about that rather than pretending otherwise. He admitted he did not feel like a priority. I pointed out I had been at my best friend's dress fitting, not on a date. He clarified it was not about the dress fitting, it was about me always running toward that part of my life and away from him. I rejected that completely. I sat down and made myself breathe. I told him I wanted to understand what he was actually asking for. He answered clearly. He wanted me to stop going to the wedding. I stayed quiet for a long time after that. I told him I had heard him and understood. I also made it clear I was not going to break my promise to Chloe. He concluded that I was choosing her over him. I corrected him. I was choosing to keep my word. He stood up and walked to the bedroom and closed the door. Not a slam. Worse than a slam. A quiet, deliberate click that somehow communicated everything louder than raised voices ever could have. I sat on the sofa for a long time staring at the ceiling, turning over what had just happened. We did not speak again that night. He was already awake when I got up. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, looking like he had not slept. I poured myself a cup and settled into the chair across from him. We held each other's gaze for a moment before either of us broke the silence. He opened with an apology for the way the night had gone. He had not meant to make me feel cornered, he offered. I told him I appreciated that. Then he admitted he still felt exactly the same way about the wedding. I told him I knew. He pushed further, wanting to understand how we were supposed to move forward if I refused to take his concerns seriously. I pointed out that I had been taking them seriously for weeks, and that taking something seriously was not the same as surrendering to whatever it demanded of me. Then he told me he needed me to make a choice. I put down my cup. I looked at him properly, at his face, which I knew very well, every expression, every small shift in it. I thought about the man who had waited with me in a registration line 2 years ago and spoken to me like I was someone worth talking to. I thought about the dinners, the long conversations, the easy, comfortable evenings that had made up most of what we were. Then I thought about the questions. The photographs of food sent from a coffee shop 12 minutes away. The words "you are being sensitive" delivered with a tone that meant I had no right to be. The closed bedroom door. The 2 years that had somehow arrived here. I told him I was not going to choose. He fired back that that was a choice in itself. Yes, I acknowledged. I know. The breakup was not dramatic in the way breakups sometimes are. No shouting, no thrown objects, no door slammed hard enough to shake the frame. It was quieter, and in some ways worse for being quiet. He told me he needed time to process things and left to stay with a friend. I sat in my apartment long after he was gone, in the particular silence that only exists after someone who has been filling your space is suddenly no longer there. I called Chloe that evening. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I was finished, she was quiet for a moment, then apologized. She admitted she had noticed things over the past year that she had not wanted to say out loud, that I had been showing up differently, a little more careful, a little more measured, like someone who had gotten used to being edited. She explained she had kept it to herself because she did not want to be the person who planted doubt in someone else's relationship. She added that she was glad I would be there on her wedding day, and that she could not imagine it any other way. I cried properly then. Not only about Noah, about all of it. About the 2 years, and the slow, incremental cost of them, and the relief that was sitting just underneath the sadness like something that had been waiting to surface for a while. I saw Ryan for the first time at the rehearsal the evening before the wedding. We said hello and talked for a few minutes about where our lives had gone since school. He seemed well. There was nothing complicated between us. No unresolved tension. No awkward undercurrent. Whatever we had been to each other at 17 existed in a completely different chapter, and neither of us had any interest in reopening it. The morning of the wedding I helped Chloe get ready in the hotel suite she had booked with the other bridesmaids. I zipped up her dress and fixed the small piece of her veil that kept catching on her earring, and watched her look at herself in the mirror for a long, quiet moment. She turned to me and her eyes were full, and she did not need to say anything. We had known each other for 15 years. Some things do not need words. The ceremony was everything it was supposed to be. Marcus stood at the end of the aisle with an expression I do not have adequate language for. It was the look of someone who has spent years loving a person and is finally standing in the official acknowledgement of it. When Chloe appeared at the back of the room, I heard him exhale from where I was standing. I walked in the processional with Ryan. We completed the choreographed dance as part of the wedding party. We appeared in photographs together. None of it felt like anything other than what it was. Two people doing their jobs on a day that was entirely about someone else. During the reception, I found myself standing near the edge of the room, watching everything happening around me. I was present in it completely, not managing anyone, not monitoring myself through someone else's lens, not calculating the cost of simply being where I was. It was the first time in longer than I wanted to admit that I felt entirely like myself. The week after the wedding was quieter than I expected. What I had not anticipated was how much space the quiet held. Room to think without filtering everything through someone else's comfort. Room to exist without performing a version of myself that had been slowly, carefully fitted to someone else's requirements. I went through the wedding photographs when they arrived. There was one of me and Ryan mid-dance that I knew Noah would have hated. We were both laughing at something I could not remember, and in the background Chloe was watching with a specific expression she gets when she is happy about something she had a hand in creating. I saved it to my phone, not because of Ryan, but because of who I was in it. Fully present, laughing, exactly where I was supposed to be. Noah texted once, about 2 weeks later. He mentioned he had been thinking and wondered if we might talk. I thought about it for a full day before responding. I told him honestly that I did not think there was anything left to say that had not already been said, and that I hoped he was well. He did not reply. I did not follow up. What I have been thinking about since, in the quiet of the life I am rebuilding in the space where all of that used to be, is how gradual it was. There was no single moment where everything changed. There was just a long, slow series of small moments, each one individually rationalizable, that accumulated into something I did not want to be living inside. You do not feel the walls moving. You just wake up one day and realize how much smaller the room has become. I do not think Noah was a bad person. I think he was someone whose fear expressed itself in ways that were not fair to me, and that I enabled for longer than I should have because I did not want to see the full shape of it. Seeing it clearly, when I finally did, was not a tragedy. It was accurate information arriving at the right time. What I also know is this: the people who love you well do not make your world smaller. They do not count the cost of your commitments or audit your loyalties or require proof of your devotion delivered in photographs from coffee shops 12 minutes away. The people who love you will show up at your door when something goes wrong and sit with you through it. They have known you since you were 9 years old, and they ask you to be their maid of honor before they have finished the sentence. Chloe and Marcus are back from their honeymoon. We had dinner at her apartment last Friday. She walked me through every photograph from the trip, and I sat there for 2 hours, letting her tell the story behind each one. Some things do not change. That is the part worth holding on to.